even when you do discredit existing systems, to build new ones and meaningfully strengthen them requires a different set of strategies. And that's where institutionalism comes in. And this is the term that has been coined by this journalist in the US, is an MSNBC commentator called Chris Hayes. He wrote a book called Twilight of the Elites, where he makes a distinction between these two. The belief that institutions can improve with structural change and that reform rather than revolution is the way forward is the idea of institutionalism. It involves being familiar with organizations, your public institutions, authorities governing the system. It involves identifying weaknesses, and creating collective action to bring attention to those weaknesses. It requires you working with the ecosystem of participants, having collective action, and advocating change as something continuous and not a one-time thing.
Some of the poshest parts of even the capital city are taking public parks and just not letting anyone else come into them. And for years and years, we've seen this kind of informal barricading of public resources. But what we are now seeing is that communities, the sense of a wider community has really gone away in the last 15 years, even as mobilization has turned into a thing of the past, and that reflects in the way we plan. I think the real trick is, how do you rethink the city? And central to my understanding increasingly is A, how do you reduce your consumption? And B, how do you basically hyper-localize cities? And when you talk of consumption, I think across India, wherever you go, every city, even if it's Bhopal, or whether you're looking at even something as magnificent as the cities in Kerala, which have consistently surprised us with their innovation and, I would say, their understanding. We are people who dump on other people. So you will look at some of the greatest waste dump sites in cities and on the peripheries of cities, where all our consumption is basically parceled off to become detritus in somebody else's front yard, poisoning their water, poisoning our water, poisoning the air, and completely destroying good land. And consequently, what I think happens to us is that we've had no incentives to reduce consumption. You can't run cities where you're chopping down trees, you're putting out plastics, because what you're doing essentially is you're making them unlivable.
You are constantly hearing stories about the police who are refusing to file FIRs. You're hearing stories about, lawyers who are working in the DLSA who don't pay enough attention to the victim, who are dismissive. So you're constantly hearing stories of abuse and villainizing of people working within public institutions. And I think, for us, our approach to it is that there are aspects of the system that don't work and that make it in many ways a very tragic and evil system. But how do we separate the people from the system, and how do we understand why the incentives or structure of the system might push certain kind of behaviors? The police ends up being in many ways one of the first frontiers of public institution and the government that you are interacting with. And most of us tend to have, not the best experiences with the cops, or it's kind of, an existing stereotype that is easily kind of espoused. So when we were looking at part of the research we do at Civic Studios is also looking at media representation. We look at how courts, police, etc. are represented on screen. What influence does it have on us? We released a report last year called Crime and Punishment in Indian Entertainment, which is on our website. And we looked specifically at the movie Simba as part of that study. Simba is in the Rohit Shetty series of movies. It's the second one that came out, and this is the Hindi version of it that we looked at. Now, there's a scene in Simba which glorifies police vigilantism as it's the definition, it's the epitome of glorifying. It's a scene where Simba, who's a police officer, someone he's close to, small spoiler alert for anyone who's going to go watch Simba, but I think it's safe to say, there's a scene where someone he's close to gets gang raped, and he's raging at the accused, and he He's trying to figure out what should I do. And he asks all the female characters that are in the movie, what do you think I should do? And each one of them is shown to say, kill them, tokto, katto, all kinds of like extrajudicial violence. And that's exactly what happens in the movie. What we saw in the research was that people who watched Simba versus people who didn't correlated statistically to a higher support for police vigilantism in real life. So that fact that it's not just that, oh, maybe media can have this effect, it did have that effect.
So what you're saying is there's a whole side to the media who either for the TRPs or for the viewership or because of their personal beliefs is putting out a certain kind of content which is creating problems in our real life, in our real world, right? And therefore, in some ways, you almost need to counter that by doing research and saying there's another way to behave. And it's not just about legal, right? It's also about an eye for an eye and whatever other philosophical belief we want to have about the kind of society we create. And therefore, we need to do this kind of research and convert that into content which is widely viewed.
I just want to come in briefly on the self-perception of municipalities. I think what we're seeing is that municipalities are turning into, they're just quite petrified. They don't exert themselves enough. And they're pretty much at the mercy of these suddenly increasing residents' welfare associations, which are turning out to be little kingdomates and little tyrannical feudal despots, really, taking control of physical pieces of land and excluding everybody, whether it's a cyclist driving by or cycling by as a shortcut, or whether it's parks, and completely horrifying way of urban governance. I mean, I really believe that the Residents Welfare Association really, that concept really needs its wings clipped. I want to take off from this beautiful thing that you said about the seeds inside us, seeds of kindness and seeds of anger. I think we should all kind of water our seeds of inclusion. And I think all of us really have to go out and do two things. I think, first of all, we have to walk in our neighborhoods, which we rarely do anymore. I mean, we just walk in the same old path, but we should walk really and look at who's there. I mean, what's your local dukaan? Oh, is there? And, start patronizing them, start talking to our neighbors about, embettering their solutions and their lives and their spaces. I think we all need to do that individually. And I think it's nice to have a private project because it kind of, it gives you an insight and it kind of anchors you in a very different way.
What is fundamentally important to us, and this is not just from a research perspective, right? This is from a representation perspective. To hear the stories, so much about civics is about diverse populations, the stratification, the inequalities, and how do we get around those. So for us, it's really important that the narratives are told by the right people that are reflecting the right experiences. If we are to make a story about waste management in a city, it's very important that we have someone from the waste management, the castes that are mostly employed in waste management, part of that writing and that storytelling, because those are the kind of experiences that are lived experiences. You can't do it academically, you can't do it theoretically. It's important that even in terms of the information and the messaging, it's not about what the 3 or 4 core people in our team on the producer side of it might think needs to be said. That to us is so dangerous because the entertainment with an intention and propaganda have shared a very thin line.